Hopefully you're safe wherever you are. As you can see, things have gone to absolute shit around here. There's no toilet paper to be found, no flour. There's no way I'm going to be able to finish my paper mache parade float. I mean, it's just all completely fallen apart. Okay, well, not really. What I've done is actually slipped into the office and grabbed the office green screen. It was one of those off-the-cuff whim purchases by the CEO, and it wasn't even being used at the office. So I thought I would go in and liberate it from its corporate confines and bring it home. Now, obviously, I'm still figuring this sort of stuff out. I suspect in the end, less will be more, and it'll be all about getting the lighting right. But in the meantime, I'm hoping you'll indulge me a little bit here. Anyway, enough with that. On with it. Okay, so despite my literary pretensions, I make no bones about the fact that I am a huge comic book geek. I have crates of comic downstairs that are polybagged and cardboard backed, and this is after handing out crates of these to the neighborhood kids. I've got the Jim Lee, Chris Claremont X-Men #1, the McFarlane Spider-Man #1, the Secret Wars and Spider-Man cover reveal of the symbiote suit that would become Venom, the Prez Wolfman Teen Titans #1. The series would go on to be one of my favorites in comic book history. Even though I'm a huge mutant fan from back in the Claremont days, I have to admit that the new Hickman run is actually really, really good. Now, I get it. It's a lot of nerdcore right there. Unless you're a middle-aged comic book geek like myself, it's probably completely lost on you. And I realize many of you come here to hear me talk about Ducks Newburyport, Korean authors, and Can Lit. This may seem like a lot. But even normals can follow along with Glen Wheldon's latest book, The Cape Crusade, Batman and the Rise of Nerd Culture. Now Glen, and I feel like I can call him Glen considering how long I've known him, not personally mind you, but countless of hours logged on listening to NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour, great podcast of which Glen is one of the co-hosts. He's a culture critic with a wry sense of humor that's equally at home talking about Tiger King, Love is Blind, as well as Bong Joon-ho's latest masterpiece. Now, Glen does a great job talking to normals. You do not need to be a comic book geek for Glen to hold your hand and walk you through his meticulously researched book on Batman. Now, Glen has already tackled Superman with his unauthorized biography and smartly realizing that the world is not yet ready for his unabashed love for Aquaman, the King of the Seven Seas. This is someone who has an Aquaman shrine on his bedside dresser, unironically owns 11 Aquaman t-shirts, 2 Aquaman pajama bottoms, and a set of Aquaman underoos, not to mention an Aquaman tattoo on his left deltoid. These are all facts that he is unashamed to admit to as proof of his bona fides. But smartly instead decides to follow it up with Batman, the natural choice really. As an octogenarian, Batman is still kicking ass almost 80 years later, and the world is awaiting yet another movie iteration with Robert Pattinson to star as Bruce Wayne. So Batman starts off in 1939 with his first appearance in Detective Comics, known then as The Batman, complete with hyphen. He's basically a direct ripoff of the far more popular The Shadow, and he's not even the most interesting millionaire vigilante that would come and try and ape the Shadow comic. You also have the Green Hornet at the time. Now, this Batman is a far different Batman than the one we're used to today. In his very first issue, he gleefully punches a bad guy through a guardrail, who then falls to his death into a vat of acid, and then he says, "A fitting end to his kind," which is kind of a dick move even for Batman. In his first year in comics, Batman will kill no less than 24 goons, 2 vampires, a pack of werewolves, and a host of giant mutants, and often with the help of a gun. And then there's the art, care of Bob Kane, that would be shamelessly copied. That first appearance of Batman, that cover, is essentially a Flash Gordon page with a cape pasted on, and those interior pages are directly ripped off from other comic books at the time and even children's books. But there was something there. It just needed to appeal to a wider audience. Batman needed a Watson to his Sherlock, someone he could explain his thinking as he was solving various crimes. Maybe something that could bring in a younger audience. And so within about a year, we'd be introduced to yet another character that would become part of the canon, and frankly, spark off a ton of homophobic pearl clutching. And Glen, a gay man himself, has to admit that even some of the early stuff with Batman and Robin, well, it was a bit gay. And it didn't exactly help quell those rumors with an unfortunate bit of kerning introducing the world to Robin. And in some of that early stuff, Bruce and Dick tanning together, Bruce and Dick sharing a bed together. I mean, totally heteronormative behavior, right? But Batman, for him to have endured for the past 80 years is nothing if not completely malleable and often a reflection of the current culture. And that's how you can have Adam West's campy Batman to Tim Burton's psychotic Bruce Wayne to Lego Batman's self-absorbed Caped Crusader to Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight. But it was back in the 70s where Batman would make what Glen calls the great inward turn. Up until that point, Batman was mostly for kids, appearing as Adam West or as a character on Super Friends. But in the comic book world, Neil Adams would bring Batman back to his grim and gritty roots. And so you would have this split between the normal's understanding of the Batman and nerd culture's understanding of the Bat. And then in 1985, Frank Miller releases The Dark Knight Returns. Now, I love this comic, but you could argue this is the single worst thing to happen to comics ever. Now, this is a Batman, a grim and gritty, badass Batman. This is a Batman that could go toe-to-toe with Superman. And yes, it got write-ups in the Rolling Stone. It made the New York Times bestseller list. And along with The Watchmen, which would come out a few years later, bring graphic novels into the light as something to be taken seriously. But at the same time, it also resulted in the ramification of comics that led to the 90s and characters like Violator, Bloodwolf, Warwolf, and Extreme. The money-grubbing tactics of comics with variant covers, foil covers, collector's issues, and worst of all, Rob Liefeld. And somehow they let this guy who's clearly never seen a human body before in his life draw comics. And for some reason, he was insanely popular. And yes, I get it, he's responsible for creating Deadpool, but much like Batman, it was an utterly shameless ripoff. In this case, the far superior DC villain, Deathstroke. And it's not like Liefeld tried even that hard. DC's Deathstroke's Slade Wilson would become Deadpool's Wade Wilson. And Frank Miller sets all of this in motion, and we can't even escape it even today. The DC universe in movies is just so dour and dark, and yes, it can bring us things like the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy, but more likely it brings us things like Suicide Squad, Batman v Superman, and the Justice League. Meanwhile, Marvel movies have just perfected the art of quipping, fan service, and having fun. The fans. Glen will spend a good bit of time concentrating on the Bat fans, with a great inward turn of the 70s and this split between the consumer idea of Batman and the nerd culture's idea of Batman. You would create this monster of nerd culture. Once you added the internet, this thing became toxic. Now, Joel Schumacher, a good Batman movie, does not make. No one's ever going to forgive him for the advent of Bat-nipples, but the Bat nerd community lost its frickin' mind creating websites like Bring Me the Head of Joel Schumacher. And when then the final movie of the Dark Knight trilogy came out from Christopher Nolan, if critics didn't find it absolutely perfect, they were immediately attacked, issued death threats, and riddled with profanity-laden emails. And don't even get me started, the Bat fans, they're mild in comparison to the Star Wars fan base. I really do like Batman, but I really like the design language of Batman as well, from the pop and color of Adam West's Batman 66 to Anton Furst's conception of Gotham and his version of the Batmobile for Tim Burton's Batman, to the Tumblr in Christopher Nolan's Batman, to Bruce Timm using black paper to paint the backgrounds in Batman the Animated Series, to the various design iterations of the Bat symbol that appears on Batman's chest. I just love that language and how it changes and evolves over time. Okay, if any of this is remotely interesting to you, I highly suggest you check out Glen Wheldon's The Caped Crusade, Batman and the Rise of Nerd Culture. Great read, and you do not have to be a nerdcore geek to get it. So, before I leave, also a few Batman recommendations for you. Of course, The Dark Knight Returns, fine. It is responsible for some of the worst things that we've seen in comics, but I still loved and remember the first time reading that. Highly recommend. Batman Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on a Serious Earth. The artwork by Dave McKeon is blow your mind away good. The story is great too. I loved Greg Capullo and Scott Snyder's run in the New 52 run of Batman with Quartervals in Year Zero. And Batman Hush with Jim Lee. The artwork is fantastic. This is someone, a Korean American that drops out of med school to draw comics. I'm sure his parents were thrilled, but no one does comics better than Jim Lee. He's also heading up DC right now, so I guess he's made the right choice. That is it for me this week. I hope I can figure out some of this green screen stuff and it's not too jarring or distracting. In the meantime, I hope you're staying safe, staying sane, and washing your hands. We'll talk to you again soon.